Early summer 1987, Freddie Mercury hadn't slept. He'd spent the night crying, listening to their voices blend. Now Montserrat Caballé sat beside him in the Spanish sun. He touched her arm again, just to make sure the dream hadn't ended. Montserrat Caballé smiled. The greatest soprano in the world and the frontman of Queen sat side by side in the Spanish sun, about to explain to the world how something impossible had just become real. Nobody expected this collaboration. Opera and rock and roll, two universes that had never touched, suddenly colliding because one man had a dream he refused to abandon. This is the story of how that dream became Barcelona. The night before the interview, Freddie couldn't sleep. He'd paced the hotel room in Ibiza, playing the recording over and over, listening to their voices intertwine like threads of gold and silver. Each time Monsi's voice soared above his, he felt something he couldn't name, not pride exactly, but something deeper, validation perhaps, proof that the boy from Zanzibar who'd been mocked for his teeth, who'd spent his childhood being sent away, who'd arrived in England as a refugee with nothing, could create beauty that transcended every boundary that had ever confined him. He'd stood on the balcony watching the Mediterranean turn from black to blue as dawn approached, and he'd cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of a dream fulfilled. This collaboration meant more to him than stadiums filled with screaming fans. This was art meeting art. This was respect earned not through spectacle, but through genuine musicality. The interview began with nervous laughter. Freddie Mercury, who had commanded stadiums of 100,000 people without breaking a sweat, was visibly anxious. His hands moved constantly, searching for a cigarette, adjusting his position, asking for an ashtray. "I'm so nervous," he admitted. The woman sitting beside him radiated calm. Montserrat Caballé. Montse, to her friends, had performed for kings and presidents, had conquered every major opera house in the world. But today she wasn't performing. She was explaining how a rock singer had convinced her to do something she'd never done before. "Call me Monsi," she told the interviewer warmly. "My very close friends call me Monsi." Freddie immediately tested the boundaries. "Can I call you my super diva, my baby, my darling?" She laughed. This was already different from any interview either of them had ever given. The story actually began months earlier in the most unlikely way. Montserrat's children were Queen fans. They played the music constantly at home. While their mother prepared for performances at the world's great opera houses, Freddie Mercury's voice echoed through their Barcelona apartment. "His music and his voice have always been heard in my home," Monsi explained. "So his style and his melodies were quite familiar to me." But familiarity didn't mean she'd expected to work with him. Opera singers and rock stars lived in completely separate worlds. They might as well have been on different planets. Then came the moment that changed everything. Freddie was in Barcelona for an interview. The journalist asked a simple question. "Who is your favorite singer?" He could have said anyone. David Bowie, Aretha Franklin, any of rock's pantheon. Instead, he said, Montserrat Caballé. The journalist must have thought it was a polite answer because he was in Barcelona. A bit of flattery for the local hero. "I didn't say it just because I was in Barcelona," Freddie insisted later. "I know it sounds corny, but it was the truth." The truth was that Freddie Mercury had been obsessed with Montserrat Caballé for years. He'd listened to her recordings late at night, studying her voice the way he'd once studied performers in London clubs. He'd watch her performances and wonder, could our voices possibly work together? It seemed like a ridiculous question. Opera and rock had never mixed. The techniques were different. The audiences were different. The entire approach to music was different. But Freddie had never let impossible stop him before. Rumors started circulating through Barcelona's music community. The rock star from Queen had mentioned Montserrat Caballé. Someone from a record company approached her with an unusual question. Would she be interested in meeting this Freddie Mercury person? He wanted to play her some music he'd written. She could have said no. Most opera singers would have. What did rock and roll have to do with bel canto? What could possibly come from mixing two completely different art forms? But Monsi was curious. Her children loved Queen. She'd heard Freddie's voice. There was something in it, a musicality, an emotion that transcended genre. She said yes. Freddie flew to Barcelona, carrying sheet music and hope. He sat at a piano in Monsi's presence and began to play. the melody he'd written specifically for her voice higher than anything he'd normally compose, structured around her extraordinary range. What Freddie didn't tell anyone was that his hands had trembled so badly before that first meeting that he'd had to sit on them for 10 minutes to stop the shaking. This wasn't stage fright. This was something more profound, the fear that his idol would see through him, would recognize him as the fraud he sometimes still believed himself to be. The immigrant boy pretending to be a rock god. The shy student playing at confidence. But when Monsi heard the first notes, something in her expression shifted. Her eyes closed. She began to sway slightly, unconsciously, the way true musicians do when they recognize something genuine. And Freddie, watching her respond to his composition, felt a knot in his chest that had been tied since childhood begin to loosen. When he offered me this great opportunity, Monsi recalled, his music and his playing on the piano were wonderful. I really think he's a marvelous musician and composer. But the real test came when they sang together for the first time. Freddie had spent weeks trying to imagine how their voices would blend. He'd even tried singing in a higher register, attempting to imitate her voice, testing whether the combination would work or crash spectacularly. It was risky, he admitted. I didn't quite know whether she would like it or not. We just had to hope. When their voices finally met, rock and opera, two completely different techniques, two entirely separate worlds, something magical happened. Our voices matched, Monsi said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The song they created together was called Barcelona. Freddie had written it as a love letter to Monsi's city, as a tribute to the place that was about to host the Olympic Games. The lyrics invited the entire world to come, to see, to celebrate. He was so kind to dedicate this first work to Barcelona, Monse explained, her voice warm with gratitude. He wrote beautiful lyrics about a Barcelona that is open to the whole world, inviting everybody to come to the city. The recording process was unlike anything either of them had experienced. Freddie was used to writing for his own voice, for the range and style he'd developed over decades. Now he was composing for someone whose technique came from centuries of operatic tradition. Before, I used to write for my voice because I know it, he said. This was a different approach. I had to make sure everything turned out right. He took his time. He was meticulous. Every note had to serve both voices. Every phrase had to work for both rock and opera. Monsi wasn't passive in the process. She changed things, adapted melodies, brought her own artistry to the collaboration. This wasn't Freddie Mercury featuring an opera singer. This was genuine partnership. The thing I want in the end for both of us is to be happy, Freddie explained. Because when we're happy, then it comes through in the music. The song began quietly, almost tentatively, just piano and voice. Then it built, slowly, carefully, both voices rising together toward a climax that was, as Monsi described it, out of this world. For Freddie, the moment of truth came when he finally got Monsi's voice recorded on tape. He'd been terrified throughout the entire process that somehow it would fall apart, that the dream would dissolve. When she came to London and I finally got her voice on tape, I thought, that's it. I've got it, he said with obvious relief. So then she can run away. I've got the voice. But Monsi had no intention of running away. She'd found something in this collaboration that surprised her. Not just musically, but emotionally. During the London recording sessions, she'd watched Freddie work with the engineers, adjusting levels, perfecting harmonies, demanding excellence from everyone, including himself. She recognized in him something she'd seen in the greatest conductors and composers. She'd worked with an uncompromising artistic vision combined with deep humility before the music itself. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was trying to create something worthy of both their voices. Freddie's music is made from his heart to all of us, she said, looking directly at him. This might be the reason his music reached my heart. Your music comes from your heart, Freddie. That's why it came through mine. Freddie nodded. Yes, it's emotional. She'd even performed one of his compositions at Covent Garden in London, one of the world's most prestigious opera houses. She'd sung Exercises in Free Love that Freddie had written and arranged specifically for her voice. The English audience thought it was crazy, she laughed, But it was a great success. Freddie had been in the audience that night. Monsi had acknowledged him from the stage, blown kisses to him. He'd stood and blown kisses back while the Opera House audience watched in delighted confusion. "She embarrassed me," Freddie said, though his smile suggested he'd loved every second. The interviewer asked what worried them most before recording began. Freddie's answer was characteristically honest. "Nothing. I was just very excited. I wanted to make sure everything turned out right." Monsi's concern was different. "I was worried about making a good interpretation of his music, to do it in a true, heartfelt way. Above all, I wanted our voices to match." They had matched spectacularly. The interviewer asked if Freddie wanted Barcelona to become the official song for the 1992 Olympic Games. "Yes, yes, yes," Freddie said immediately. Then, with typical humor, "If they don't like this one, I'll write another one. You can't go much stronger than just saying Barcelona. It tells you everything right there." The presentation of the song was planned for Ibiza instead of Barcelona itself. The interviewer asked Monsi what she thought about the location. "They've chosen the appropriate place," she said. "The sea is our sea. The air is our air. It brings back Mediterranean and Catalan memories." Freddie didn't care where they premiered it. "We have to start somewhere. The song has to be heard by everybody. In the end, it's for the whole world." When asked about his next career step, Freddie's answer was immediate. "More songs with Monsi. She's going to take up all my time, and I'm quite prepared to do it." The interviewer pressed Monsi about whether this collaboration might bring opera closer to young people. "I'm sure," she said. "Young people already come to opera. This approach between our voices makes it easier." Freddie's music holds the soprano voice in a way very similar to bel canto and Rossini, creating a mixture that's very impressive. "This has never happened before. Opera and rock together, I love it." "Pure opera and rock and roll," Freddie agreed. "Two very different sides. It's very difficult for the voices to match. I think we've done it." They had done more than match voices. They'd proven that boundaries between musical genres existed only in people's minds, that a rock star and an opera diva could create something neither could have made alone. As the interview ended, they were presented with a gift, a silver caravel commemorating the discovery of America. "It's wonderful," Freddie said, examining it with genuine delight. "Beautiful," Monsi agreed. They sat there together, the rock legend and the opera queen holding their shared gift, having just explained to the world how they'd created something impossible. 4 years later, Barcelona would open the 1992 Olympic Games, playing to billions of people worldwide. But Freddie wouldn't be there to see it. He would be gone by then, taken by AIDS in 1991. But in 1987, sitting in the Spanish sun, Freddie Mercury was still touching Montserrat Caballé's arm to make sure she was real, still marveling that his dream had come true. "I still don't believe it's happening," he'd said. It was happening, and it was beautiful. Two artists from different worlds had found common ground in the only language that truly matters, the language of emotion, of vulnerability, of music created not for fame or money, but for the simple, profound joy of making something beautiful together. Years later, Monsi would say that working with Freddie taught her that genius recognizes genius, regardless of genre, that true artistry transcends the artificial boundaries we create, that sometimes the most unlikely collaborations produce the most extraordinary art. And Freddie, in his final years, would listen to Barcelona and remember that afternoon in the Spanish sun when an opera diva called him her friend, when his voice, the voice he'd once been ashamed of, the voice that came from a boy who'd been sent away and mocked and told he didn't belong, had blended perfectly with the greatest soprano in the world. The dream hadn't just come true, it had exceeded everything he'd ever imagined.